Hello, friends. I'm Kush Khandelwal, and this is Ageless Athlete. A few years ago, I started asking questions that would not leave me alone. Why do some people keep pushing mentally, physically, spiritually long after others burn out or break down? What does it really mean to age well when you still crave movement, meaning, and mastery? This show is my search for answers. Each week, I talk to elite athletes, everyday adventurers, and pioneering researchers who are stretching the limits of what's possible across age, injury, illness, and self doubt. You will hear hard won lessons, untold stories, and science backed strategies for building a body and mindset that lasts. For those of us joining for the first time, welcome to the show. For the rest, thank you for joining us again. Time is our most valuable asset, and I deeply appreciate you giving me your time today. Welcome to Ageless Athlete. This is your host, Kush Khandelwal. I am excited to bring you a great episode today, a conversation where I just had the best time. I was smiling, beaming, laughing, and loving every moment of this conversation with Chris Kalous. Chris embodies the spirit of ageless adventure and storytelling better than most people I know. At 53 years young, he has spent over 3 decades climbing the world's most iconic rock faces all over North America, Peru, New Zealand. He has done some epic climbs. But what sets Chris apart isn't just his climbing achievements, it's his gift for connecting with others through his storytelling. As the voice behind the beloved Enormocast podcast, Chris has brought nearly 300 episodes of heartening and hilarious conversations to the climbing community, making him one of the most relatable figures in the sport. I started listening to Chris's episodes over long car rides from Yosemite and other places, and was just enthralled. And this is such an honor to have him on the pod. In this episode, we will dive into his journey, not just as a climber, but as a storyteller and podcaster who has captured the heart of all of us adventure, mountain loving athletes. We talk about how he's maintained his passion and performance in climbing as life's responsibilities have grown. He is the father of a young boy, and how he stays vibrant and active no matter the challenges that all these things present. Chris shares some fantastic stories, and we enjoy this easy vibe that comes naturally when you are talking to someone who truly understands the sport. Whether you are a climber or not, there are some great takeaways in this conversation. We talk about staying connected to the community, which keeps your passion alive. We talk about the power of play. Well, no matter your age, keeping this playful spirit is key to maintaining a youthful outlook. And then adaptability. Chris moved from climbing big walls to shorter, perhaps harder sport climbing. And that has been his longevity's secret, I think. A lesson that can be applied to life. So whether you are here for the climbing stories or looking for inspiration to stay active and engaged as you age, this episode is for you. Stick around. I'm excited to have Chris on the show.
I am in Carbondale, Colorado, in my studio of sorts down here in the basement. I run a podcast from the basement, not my mother's house, but my own house, actually. So that's pretty good. Breakfast was actually a little bit opposite than what I usually do this morning, which is I had some French toast because we had made some for our kid and there was batter left. And so I had French toast, which I usually do eat healthier than that. But whatever, it's fine once in a while. But normally I saute some veggies and things like that to make sure I'm getting my fiber.
Many people I have on the show are eating oats, oats and blueberries. So French toast on Friday sounds delicious. I actually wish I had some of that myself. That sounds good.
Yeah, it's not a monastery over here. I'm a little lax on my nutrition, but we'll keep going.
And yeah, funny about you not being in your mother's basement. I don't know if people caught that, but yeah, there is this, this funny stereotype of like dirtbag athletes, not just climbers, but surfers, etc., trying to keep that dream going by living on the frugalist extreme and trying to figure out like an existence by climbing full time and living off mom's dinner table.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
I am Chris Kalous, 53 years old. Like I said, I live in Carbondale, Colorado. I am a rock climber primarily, and I also am a podcaster like yourself. I've been doing the Enormocast podcast for coming up on 13, almost, yeah, it'll be 13 years this year, which is old school podcasting. Still a popular podcast, still a pretty big voice in the climbing world. I'm on another podcast that I started a couple years ago with my friend Andrew Bisharat called the Run Out Podcast. And so those two things still connect me deeply with the climbing community, even though I'm also a dad and don't climb nearly as much as I once did, partially because of that and partially just all the parts of life that take your time away from climbing. So yeah, that's me. Also a musician of sorts, kind of a hobbyist on the guitar and the bass. And I don't do that many other real sports. I'm not an aficionado of anything else. It's sort of a one track mind as far as my sports go. So just a climber.
Chris, I have been listening to the Enormocast for as long as I remember. I probably first started listening to yours. I can't remember the exact time, but I think it was likely a climbing trip. And I could be wrong, but it might have been like the Hayden Kennedy episode or one of the one of your one of your big interviews back in the day. It's funny how I feel my climbing journey has shifted itself in that decade plus time that you have been producing your content. But going back, what was the genesis of the Enormocast? Was there a journalist inside you besides a climber that was always seeking to explore this medium and bring out stories and tales of all of these climbers out there? Why did you start the podcast?
If that was there, it was a bit latent. I had written a little bit for Climbing Magazine, but more just because Climbing and Rock and Ice were both headquartered in Carbondale, Colorado. For some time, both of them together. Actually, at one point, we were sort of the American, print climbing media capital. Actually, still Alpinist is the editor from Alpinist, a good friend of mine, lives just like a mile from here. So it's still going on. But anyhow, not really a journalist, but I was a dirtbag and I was a house painter, and I was a very early adopter of podcasts in terms of just putting something in my ears besides the same music that I was sick of, pre-Spotify, when you could just dial up anything you wanted. And so I started listening to podcasts kind of in the what I call the second wave, not their their origination, but when they started to become a little bit more mainstream, thanks mostly to Apple and the iPod. You had to download them onto your iPod off your computer. But I think iTunes really, was this genesis. And also NPR, actually, if you look at the history, was a very big part of podcasting becoming mainstream, which is interesting to think that NPR was on the cutting edge of something, but they were rebroadcasting their shows, their radio shows as podcasts. And I think that really pushed it over the edge. So this was about the time. And I was inspired by a couple different ones. The History of Rome podcast, which is not going, but that guy is still doing podcasts. And also WTF with Mark Maron was really the genesis. And so I was listening to that, realizing that he was interviewing comedians, but not necessarily about, teeing them up for their comedy like you would see them on a like a late night show. Or, you ask a question that just sets them up to do a bit, but about their lives and about who they were and it turns out that like comedians are super messed up people for the most part, but also very interesting people. And I thought like, wow, there was a lot of emotion in it. There was a lot of, just really deep talk about the philosophy behind it. And I just thought that I could do that with climbing. And I had been climbing long enough. I mean, I've been climbing 35 years now. So that was 11 years or 13 years ago. I'd been climbing a long time, even at that point. And I kind of knew a lot of people. And, the cool thing about climbing, and I think a lot of the sports that you talk about on your show, is that, you can hang out and meet and climb even next to or with like the greatest climbers in our sport. Very easily, if you show up at the right crag on the right day. And a lot of sports aren't like that. So I had rubbed elbows with these people and started asking them to do this thing, and basically just stole Mark Maron's format, lock, stock, and barrel. And that was really what made me start doing it. I had actually a podcast before this with a partner called Off Belay that no longer exists. But that was helpful in kind of getting my chops. And then I went out on my own and started doing the Enormocast. And there was really good uptake right in the beginning. So that helped. It's hard to do, to yell into the void and not have anybody kind of be interested in it. But I was kind of at the right place at the right time, and there was a hunger for it. And that was just the start of it. And like all podcasts, it started out as a hobby that I would just do for the fun of it. But that, you start to realize it's a ton of work and it takes away from all these other parts of your life. And so you kind of need or want to be compensated for it. And that's turned out, varying levels of success. But I feel as though my compensation now for it through advertising and stuff is commensurate with the work that I put into it. Not getting me rich, but keeping me going when I could, and especially since I had a kid in that time too, and taking time and resources away from a family for something as time consuming as podcasting maybe wouldn't work. But yeah, that's how it all kind of happened. And here I am 13 years later, about to post episode 290. So there you go. And basically everybody's been on almost.
Yeah.
So
Certainly. Well, I mean, 13 years and so many, like hundreds of episodes later. Glad to hear that you're finally being compensated fairly, I hope, for all the work you've put in and the legions of fans you have around. I don't know if I'm sure you realize this, but you have, there are people listen to your podcast in corners of the globe where you may not even think there are avid climbers. Like I am from India, and I have, I didn't really climb until I moved to the States in '99, but I'm connected with the Indian climbing community. And I have people who have been climbing in India for a long time, and they have been sharing your episodes, for over a decade. So anyways.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I'm quite proud of it. I think it's funny when I tell people that I'm a podcaster. That's what I do for a living. My wife makes fun of me all the time because I'm real sheepish about it, because there is this stereotype of like everybody's got a podcast kind of a thing. So it's kind of, another white guy in his basement, like talking about, whatever. So it's a little bit funny there, but I'm quite proud of it. And I think it is actually this very large repository of climbing history. I didn't necessarily set out to do that, but obviously it happened because of, just by virtue of wanting to talk to everybody at all corners of climbing. There's unfortunately, plenty of guests that have passed away since I've interviewed them. Some in climbing, some just from natural causes. I think those episodes are very important now that they exist. I'm quite proud of that. I'm also proud of like just kind of chronicling more of the culture than necessarily the specifics of what we talked about. I think it's a very large sort of breadth of what climbing means to people and why this seemingly silly and useless thing we do actually is important and does have meaning. It's all kind of there, and if I stopped it tomorrow, it would still be there. As long as I keep it up on the internet, and I think it's really cool, and there's some recognition out there for that. I've been invited to go to Banff this year for Mountain Film and do a presentation up there, which I think is a recognition of that work as well. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. It's probably the most important thing I've done in climbing. I mean, not probably, it certainly is. I've done hard and cool ascents and first ascents, but none of them obviously roots have an impact of what I've done with the podcast. And so yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. It's my life's work in a way.
When I think of your podcast, sometimes I think of the Encyclopedia Britannica in a way, sitting above like the fireplace in somebody's house, where one can keep referring back over time and just check on like, hey, who were these people? And that information is available out there. So yeah, man, like as another average climber out in the ether, thank you for putting together this rich collection of climbing history for us. You spoke that you were listening to the history of Rome, and you listened to NPR. It's funny. I used to listen to NPR as well on FM radio pre discovering podcasts, and I think that to me that was also sort of an inspiration, source of learning. But you spoke of the history of Rome, and listening to a lot of your podcasts, it seems that you do have this fascination of the origins of the sport, of the origins of like significant moments of our sport. Is there like have you always been like, let's say, a student of history from different walks of life?
Well, I mean, I'm a liberal arts guy. I have a degree in literature, which in some ways is a delving into the history. That's what you do, for better or worse, in a literature degree, as you look at the past almost exclusively. Like, it's rare to have you might have one contemporary kind of literature class, but you go into the past, and so all those things are connected to past historical events as well. And there's types of literary criticism that doesn't look at that stuff, but I was always interested in what's going on that influenced this writing, or how did it influence actual events and cultural movements and things like that. So yeah, I think all that was there, and I'm a very amateur interest in history in general, biography. I go on jags with reading, where I read everything I can about a certain subject. I was just kind of finished up like last year, a couple of years ago, like reading about the Age of Discovery with the ships around the world. And I probably, read 12, 13 books, all focused on that, all in a row, one after another. And, and then basically flushed all that information out. I don't have a good memory for those things, but at the time it just gets fascinating. And to think of people doing what they did, especially from an adventure standpoint, back in the past like that, is pretty fascinating. And I think it's connected to this climbing thing. It's like we try to manufacture the same level of excitement that I think those kind of people exploring the world had, but it's, like I said, it's sort of manufactured. Like, it's not quite as real. It's not, you aren't out in a boat losing your teeth and, from scurvy or whatever. It's like, it's a little bit different, but it's the same impetus humans have. And this is what we're set with in the time that we live in, is we got to kind of go out and find these last frontiers, and climbing can be sort of your little mini version of that.
I've been thinking a lot about energy, not just in training, but in recovery, in focus, in how we age. So when I came across NutriSense, it hit home. It's a program that pairs a 24/7 glucose biosensor with a dedicated dietitian to help you understand how your body responds to food, stress, sleep, and movement, and then act on the data. I chose it because I wanted something real, not another hack or one size fits all plan, just honest insight into what's actually going on inside me and how to build habits that last. NutriSense has helped over 150,000 people take that step. And if you want to try it, you can get 33% off your first month with code Ageless15 at nutrisense.io. Again, that's nutrisense.io, code Ageless15. You can also find this information on the show notes for this episode.
I love reading, and I also love historical nonfiction, and I also go down some of these rabbit holes. I recently just read this book on whaling in
Oh yeah.
England, from like a couple hundred years ago. And oh my God, like everybody I was meeting, I was telling them to go read that book, and they were just giving me those like funny eyes, like what? So it's funny. So one question I love asking people sometimes randomly is, if you were given a choice of going 100 years into the future or 100 years in the past, I know what my answer is. And I think I know what your answer might be, but I want to hear it from you.
Man, that's a tough one because 100 years isn't long enough. I'm thinking about like what was going on 100 years ago. Yeah, I mean, it'd be all right. It's like what, the turn of the century? Or no, we're talking about we'd be into the 20s. Yeah, nah, I'd go future, I think. Now, give me 1,000 years. Give me 1,000 years, I might go back. Go back like, yeah. And as long as I could choose the place. Like, I don't want to go back to like, Middle Ages England by any means. No offense, but it sounds pretty grim. If I could drop in onto a Greek island in one of Socrates' classes, I'd be more hip to that for sure. There's a lot of places that would pretty much suck 1,000 years ago, and can I bring some antibiotics with me? It would be nice too.
Antibiotics and maybe real food or something,
Yeah.
Bring supplements from one of, I don't know, if you have a supplement company.
Yeah. I was thinking about a segue though with that Enormocast chat, because one thing I've pointed out before, and I really believe is the thing it's done for me, the gift it's given me, and you were talking about like what I've learned from it or whatever. Maybe not quite the same thing, but it's kept me connected as I've gotten older to the climbing community in a way that I don't think I could have maintained just on my own. Again, one of the things we face, and this is the theme we're at here with this podcast, the Ageless Athlete, is that as much as we face like our bodies not cooperating, let's say, we face life, and we face a diminishing amount of time to put towards whatever pursuit we have, whether it's family, whether it's career, worrying about retirement, whatever makes us not have every day of our lives to go out and rock climb like we used to. This thing has kept me in the mix in a way that I didn't anticipate. And I think that's kind of this really special thing about it. For me, that's been the biggest gift of it, whether it's, as opposed to necessarily the knowledge that I've gotten from these climbers. But yeah, just being connected as I've gotten older, because it's hard to stay in the mix, and like I said, I think that's a big theme of what you do over here at this show.
This is a rich topic.
Yeah.
And, I can't wait to dive deeper into some of these lessons and the journey. Before I forget, one thing I certainly wanted to comment on is your podcast name may be my favorite name of all podcasts. The Enormocast. It is such a cool name. Like it points to both. It is like this insouciant take on the world of podcasting and climbing, because it talks about, it hints to both the vast potential, but in this like irreverent way, which it's just such a great name. I need an Enormocast sticker at some point.
Oh hell yeah. For sure. I got stacks of them right here.
Yeah, awesome. I'm gonna hit you up for that. On that note, Chris, you have this in my listener point of view, you have this, again, slightly like uncaring style. Like, you have this irreverent approach to it in a way. Obviously, your content, your questions, all of it is deeply researched and comes from a place of curiosity and thought. But, 13 years into it, like you still have this, in many ways you have preserved the style. Like you don't have this polished Instagram, social media broadcast, right?
Yeah, I do not.
You have a YouTube channel yet or not?
But I was just thinking about it today.
I'm just wondering, like, is it that you are just so well established that you don't need to do those things? I'm curious, where are you with that journey of being relevant and keeping up and wanting to do either more or maybe less with the podcast?
Oh man, it's like you were here for the last 4 hours this morning listening to me talk to different people about this very subject. Literally, I've spent the morning talking to other podcasters and other people about this very thing of remaining relevant, of pushing the podcast forward, because I have been riding on my laurels. You just said something about being established, and that is, and I kind of had the field almost to myself for quite a few years. There was a couple other people doing different podcasts, but I felt out there by myself, and so I definitely have been thinking about a sort of a retool, bringing in the video stuff, and I've just been, because I've gotten kind of lazy, and with that complacency, I started questioning, okay, well, am I as creative as I once was with this thing? And so there's been a little bit of that, of me soul searching, like I said, literally before I got on the mic here with you, about, what can we tune up? And again, that creativity thing, because you're not super new. You've got quite a few episodes out, but it loses its luster when you start to just keep banging out interview after interview or show after show after show, and your site comes and goes, and so being established is great, but it's also a bit of a dead end as far as creativity. So I've been kind of thinking a lot about that. And financially, there's that too, but creativity and doing what I want to do has always come first. And maybe that's the irreverence that you mentioned, is that I want to do what I want to do. And anytime I have to think about, well, is this going to be popular or not? Is this going to help my numbers? It depresses me and it's like this, whatever echo effect, where then I want to do it even less, even though I need to do it even more. So yeah, I've been thinking about that. I don't know if that answered your question, but there'll be some changes forthcoming, probably. Hopefully not the ultimate change where I just stop doing it. But yeah, I think about it a lot, mainly from a creativity standpoint.
Sure. Well, in some ways, it's a little affirming or whatnot that somebody who I, in many ways, look up to as having inspired this legion of audio wannabes has maybe some level of need, or may I say even some level of doubt as to where you want to be. And I'm sensing.
You kidding?
I'm sensing. No, hang on.
Every time I press post, I'm like, oh, I don't know if this one's any good. Like literally every time. So.
That's fine. Because I feel like it could be.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, it's fine. I think it could be maybe. I'm sensing it's not just because I'm sensing I don't know your numbers, but I'm sensing you're still wildly popular. But it's like what you said. It's like, but what you are getting out of this yourself. Like nobody's podcast for becoming another NVIDIA. You start something because you're seeking some truths, some answers, some stories, some inspiration. And yeah, maybe. Well, let me put it this way. I will take inspiration from the fact that, yes, I have a few episodes under my belt, but I'm only still 6 months in. So hopefully I still have a few years of growth and learning before I maybe, I don't know, hit some sort of plateau with this thing. It could come.
Well, let me tell you something that's, I think, pretty interesting, is that when I started the podcast, and you probably remember this, I insisted on doing face-to-face interviews. Okay. And I insisted on that for something like, well, let's see, it was 2020. So it was 9 years. I insisted on face-to-face interviews, even as this technology that we're using now was getting better and better. And I managed to do it for 206 or 207 episodes, where and in that time, I lived my life. I had a kid. I bought a house. I lived all these things, and twice a month for 9 years, I was putting out a face-to-face interview without any production support from anybody. And it's like, I sit here thinking about that every time I talk about it. I can't believe it. And I wanted to use an expletive there. I'm not sure if we do that on the show, but I couldn't effing believe it. I still can't. That somehow every month I just scrabbled together these meetups here in town at a climbing area. I travel a little bit. It just was bonkers. I don't know. I don't know why I wanted to bring that up, but it was part of just like the scrambling, but also maybe part of the burnout of just like how desperate I was for a long time, or made myself that way. And that was, it was making money at the end of those 9 years, but those first 4 or 5, it wasn't very much anyway. So yeah, it's just, and I guess maybe if you want to talk later about my personality and things like that, if that's part of the show, I mean, it must have been something in there. It is. I mean, it's like I can be obsessive about these weird things like that.
Chris, your personality comes across loud and clear and strong and beautifully. And I meant to mention this later, that the fact, this nuance, I hope doesn't get lost on people, that while I'm out here recording from the comfort of my living room, and you are as well at your house, but for a long time, you were on the road and interviewing people, I think in your van, in hotel rooms, I don't know, all kinds of places. And as challenging as it sometimes feels to me, and maybe others who are also doing this whole remote recording thing of lining up people and organizing things. I mean, what you were doing back then, Chris, of like, traveling to far corners to get people lined up and getting all the logistics organized. I mean, that is truly commendable. It might have been other things that you finally succumbed to COVID.
It was COVID. Yeah. It was 100% COVID. I just ran out, like, not even until July, right? Because it all kind of 2020 all kind of went down in March, right? And then around July, I ran out. I had like a stockpile, and then in July, I was like, I guess I'm out, and I guess I'm doing this. And then it's been great. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's tons of advantages to this, to broaden your ability to get people overseas and things like that. But yeah, it was kind of nuts actually. And it gives me an ulcer to even think about doing it that way now. Even though my life hasn't changed that much. But the other thing is that I wasn't really on the road. I mean, I was much more settled, and I've joked many times that if I had had this hustle when I was in my 20s and I was living on the road, hey guys, the internet didn't really exist. That's how long ago that was. Email kind of existed, but at the end of it, actually. But if I had this hustle, it'd be great. It would have been great. I mean, it would have easily funded my lifestyle. It would have been probably a better show because I'd have been all over the world doing this thing. But it was just technically impossible because podcasting didn't exist. And the internet barely existed, and cell phones kind of were new. Like all these tools we believe in and have been here since the beginning of time are not that old, So yeah, anyhow, that's just kind of another way to look at it. It would have been a great hustle when I was living in my car.
Well, Chris, you already were a pioneer in many ways. So I don't know how many medals, you want hang on you, but you were already out there blazing, I would say, a high risk trail.
Appreciate it.
And the fact that you did it for many years. I mean, a lot of us, we started this podcasting journey and we're looking for a validation in many ways, much, much sooner. So the fact that you stuck with it, no surprises that it has paid off for you all this time later. One other thing I was kind of curious on, Chris, is, your show is, I think in many ways, unapologetically about rock climbing, right? You are, again, like in many ways, a purist of the sport. You adore everything about climbing. And however, I did notice that I was doing some research, like one of your reviewers, I think it was iTunes or Apple Podcasts, somewhere else, mentioned that they don't even climb, but they just happened to have discovered your show and they're hooked. I'm just wondering, does that kind of feedback ever matter to you, that there are other non-climbers who may be getting something out of your show?
Friends, it means a lot that you're here. I pour a ton of heart into the show. The research, the interviews, the editing, it's all me trying to share stories that matter. If Ageless Athlete has ever made you feel seen, inspired you, or just kept you company on a long drive, or better, over a run or a bike ride, I would be so grateful if you considered supporting it. Even a small amount helps keep it going, helps keep bringing the show to you for free. You can chip in at buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. Again, buymeacoffee.com/agelessathlete. You can find the link on the show notes as well. Thank you for listening and for being part of this.
Actually, it matters to me in one way, and in another way, it doesn't. So I'd say that it doesn't in that I don't. You're right. I don't cater my show to help you along with understanding what we're talking about. You'll read a book about climbing. That's clearly because you want to make money off your book. You got to stop and explain what belaying is, for example, in your book, because you want other, people outside of climbing to buy it. Makes total sense. I don't care about that. However, it matters to me when I do hear from these people in the sense that, that's a real kind of different type of validation in that they just enjoy the way you've built the show. But also, it tells me that we're talking about universalities a lot of times. And I think that's what's interesting about climbing and exciting about climbing to people who don't climb. And if, I think if we were just talking about, training and things like that a lot of podcasts cover, you wouldn't draw those people in. But since we're talking about these big ideas of fear and of accomplishment and of overcoming, all the things that go with climbing, people can relate. And it's a beautiful sport like that, that people can draw inspiration without actually doing it. And I deprecate the sport a lot. I talk about, how dumb it is and how silly it is that we boulder, that we sport climb. But I don't really believe that, and I get around to talking about how important it is. And climbing and mountains and things have existed, speaking of the historical context in mythology, since people saw, if you lived around mountains as whatever a tribal or some hunter-gatherer group, then you had myths about what was on top of that mountain. It's just it's a universality, and that comes down to this day that people are interested in that, and these metaphors and these the guru, the person with the knowledge was on top of the mountain, and you had to fight to get to that person. And that's an archetype that's everywhere. So we're dealing with that. And if that comes across to someone who doesn't necessarily climb, then I think that's a really awesome thing to hear.
I would agree that one doesn't have to be a climber or, let's say, an outdoor adventurer to appreciate the wild and beautiful outdoors. I mean, if you look at a lot of the popular imagery even employed by some of the world's biggest brand product companies, I mean, they're evocative of the outdoors. You have beautiful sunsets and oceans and mountains. And I think the whole idea is to maybe create that emotional response that maybe we are genetically engineered for, which these brands want, so that they go and buy, you go and buy their products. So I think with your part, I think there are so many of them, so many episodes, which I think hint to that, the human struggle against ambition, against Mother Nature. Actually, on that note, because on this pod, I am trying to, unlike you, I'm trying to make climbing and these outdoor sports maybe relatable to a cross-genre audience. I'm curious. Mm-hmm. You have had so many episodes, so it may be difficult to have you answer this right now. But would there be a couple of episodes, Chris, that you might point people to and say, you know what, these episodes were enjoyed, perhaps by an audience outside of just core climbers?
Whenever I'm doing this and someone's like, hey, do you have a favorite episode, or do you have, I completely go blank. I don't even remember who I interviewed. I don't know, but I can tell you that, the legendary one that really helped and keeps getting cited, and is a running joke that I peaked at number 11. Yeah, Craig DiMartino's episode. If that's a universal thing. It's an episode about a climber who had a terrible accident and lost his leg eventually. It didn't even happen immediately in the accident, and so it's incredibly moving. Craig is an incredible person and a great storyteller. And it actually, for me too, I remember being there, and it was, like I said, it's episode 11. So it was the first year I was doing it, but, of thinking like, okay, I hit the vein. I've been messing around for 10 episodes, mostly interviewing my friends, and I felt the potential of what the medium could do. So that's a really cool one. There's the one that jumped to mind a couple years ago is Paul Pritchard. And this is another disabled climber, actually. Those are moving episodes, when you can get someone to talk about their journey from being a super able-bodied climber, because we worship our physical abilities. It's part of the deal. To have some of them taken away and decide to keep going at the sport can be a very moving story. So Paul's recently, I don't know the number of it, but Paul Pritchard fell and messed himself up. That's all I can say. Off of the totem pole in Tasmania, or got hit by a rock. Actually, he did. And anyhow, that one is a moving one of recent times. I think those kinds can be the ones that really cross over for people.
I've had Craig on my show also.
Yeah, I know. He's awesome.
And I had listened to that episode with Craig back in the day, but I had to go back and re-listen to it when I was like, you know what, I'm going to talk to Craig. Let me go back and listen to Chris interview Craig. And yeah, those stories of overcoming, big obstacles, life hurdles. I mean, they are a big essence of what my show is about. And by interviewing people like Craig, I think I also help push myself. It fuels my journey as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to point to a couple of episodes for our listeners that I think a lot. So,
great, you probably remember better than I do.
One recent episode, which for me was really close to heart, was Didier Berthaud's journey, because I'm 46. I'm old enough where I was following Didier back in the day. When he was out there gunning for the Cobra crack along with Sunny and whatnot, and suddenly he disappeared. So when you brought him on, I was like, oh my god, what a coup! You have Didier on, and then I started listening, and the second episode, both of them, and then I knew of Thomasina and the whole story, and it's such a powerful story. So I encourage listeners to go listen to it and not hear me ramble. Mm-hmm. Another one is, for example, is with Jim Donini. So I hope to get him on the show at some point. It's funny. I actually spoke with Thomas Huber early in the show, and Thomas is in the Karakoram right now with Jim, and it's
sure. Yeah,
I think it's so people have to just go and listen to your episode with Jim. I think it is so inspirational about somebody who is, I don't know, decades later, he's still going after it with, that enthusiasm of a teenager. It's super cool. Chris, going back to you a little bit, I want to start talking a little bit about your climbing journey, because that's where it all began.
Yeah.
How did you get into the sport? Were you also a natural athlete?
No, not even close. And the what I realized too from doing the podcast is that what happened, or how I sort of found it, was really common of the era. And this is in the late 80s, early 90s. I was a small kid growing up. I was not athletic. I was not good at normal sports because I was much smaller. So, I played the soccer and the t-ball and all these things. And if you look at team pictures of those times, I was like, the kids were all lined up, and then it would take this huge dip and I'd be there and I'd look like somebody's little brother, got into the photo or something like that. And so that was tough. And so naturally I kind of just got away from those sports. I I'm sort of the skinny, what is it, ectomorph? Is that what it's called? I don't know. Like, is that right? When you're like just naturally kind of like calories just burn the hell off of you. I was really outdoorsy as a kid, though, like kind of the typical Midwestern thing. I grew up in the north suburb of Chicago, Libertyville, Illinois. But my extended family is all in Wisconsin, so fishing and those sorts of things, and camping and stuff like that. And I got really into being in the boundary waters up in Minnesota, which was like kind of wilderness camping and really cool. But I saw like a lot of people of my generation. In my case, it was a magazine. A lot of times it's a book you saw at the library. I hear this story a lot, and it was like you found, a vial of crack and like hit it. And for some reason you were like, this looks awesome. And your cells all scream to do it. And so I saw a magazine with John Backer, who's I came to find out who he was much later. And I decided that I was going to be a climber, even though I'd never done it before. And the interesting thing is I was kind of into weightlifting in high school. Like all boys, I just, I wanted to look kind of swole and tough and try to attract women with my muscles, which is a fool's errand for the most part. But we think that's going to work. I think every man does at some point in their life. But I told my coach in that class kind of sheepishly that I wanted to be a climber. And I thought he would just like roll his eyes, but he had actually been to a Knowles course and had climbed a little bit. Big guy, big football guy. And so he said, well, I've tried it. And this is 87. I wasn't very good at it because I'm too big. He's like, you're the right size. Like you could be good at it. And here's what I think you should do. Right. Both of us, no idea what it takes to necessarily train to rock climb. No one did actually in the 80s. They were just blowing their elbows up on backer ladders and things like that. So he basically was like, all right, you need to get strong, not heavy. And so by the time I got out of high school, I was like ripped, just like I looked like some person that would leap across, speaking of the Romans, would leap across Hadrian's wall and with a loincloth on and run a wooden spear through you. I was just like this totally ripped little savage. And I went off to Colorado to go to college, and I started climbing almost the first day I was there. And sure enough, I was pretty good at it. I was strong, I was light, and I was ready. I've been dreaming about it for 2 years.
That was your first time climbing? Like you had, let's say, fantasized about climbing and you had this idea, but literally that was your first time actually going climbing?
Yeah, never climbed before. There's no such thing as a climbing gym in 1989. Actually not no such thing, but they were like dingy walls that climbers had made in places where you climbed, which the suburbs of Chicago was not one of those places. Despite the fact that Devil's Lake was close by, I had no idea what was happening there. So I know I'd never rock climbed. I just had trained for this idea of it.
But that's insane. Like you were so struck by these stories that you heard.
One story. Yeah. I didn't even go beyond the research of that. Like, I had a subscription to Outside magazine, its early iteration. So I probably was seeing more things about climbing in there. But I really only remember this one article, which I've confirmed existed. It wasn't this apocryphal tale that I made up in my head. Actually, I just talked to Kurt Smith, a very famous climber from the 80s, all the way through to today. And he definitely confirmed that this John Backer article did exist about that time. So, which I was happy to find out that, I hadn't lived my entire 25 or 35 year climbing career on this myth. It did exist.
Had you though been exposed to the mountains though, like had the outdoors touched you in a different way, which maybe was some kind of spark? The reason I ask is I also didn't start climbing until my 20s. But when I was a kid, I would go hiking and backpacking in the mountains with my family. And at that point, I also started devouring a lot of books about climbing. And I think in my mind, I realized I did want to be a climber. So maybe that was my genesis in a way. But I'm curious, like, was there some of that also in your life where the outdoors just touched you deeply and you were like, you know what, climbing will help me connect with both my body, my muscles, my newly sprouted muscles, and maybe this some kind of like fascination with nature.
Yeah, for sure. That, and it's funny to say this as a person. I've flown a helicopter into the Northwest Territories and been dropped there for 30 days in the middle of like maybe the deepest wilderness almost in North America, kind of a thing. But there was this little state park in Wisconsin, 26 miles of hiking trail called Kettle Moraine State Park, in just sandwiched between fields, farm fields and stuff, this little strip of woods. And I went backpacking there through a program at my middle school. And so that was like this exposure to that. And there was this, it's kind of a long story, but there was this gym teacher who did these little backpacking weekends. And this is in the early 80s. Again, not a Knowles course, not an outdoor. We would just go for the weekend. But the thing he would do, this fascinates me because you couldn't possibly do this anymore, is he would drop us off. We'd go up there on Friday afternoon, and we'd get there in the middle of the night after stopping to eat dinner and stuff. And he would just drop us off in the dark at a trailhead. And he would say, go that way. And you'll find in a few miles, you'll find this shelter that we've reserved. And that's where we're going to sleep. And it was just like a 3-walled shelter. Anybody who knows this park just got a visceral picture of the sights and smells of these shelters. And then we would walk off into the woods in like 7th graders. And the first time anybody had ever allowed us that kind of like weird freedom other than maybe in our neighborhood. And I just remember it was intoxicating to me. And what I found out later, because I started, as I got older and I'd still go on these trips, I started kind of being part of the chaperoning of it, is that he would just drive, the trail would cross roads. Cause I mean, again, we're just in the middle of Wisconsin, and he would go to the next trailhead and park out of sight. And then he would walk down the trail, stand in the woods, like 10 feet off the trail, and watch us go by, and just keep an eye on us. But we had no idea. We thought, you might as well have, like I said, dropped us in the circle of the unclimbables. We were like so into it. And I got really into that. And then in 8th grade, I was also into motocross, trail riding mostly, but I crashed my motorcycle and I ended up in the hospital for a month when I was in 8th grade, however you're 13 or 14 or whatever you are in 8th grade. And during that time, I thought a lot about these two worlds. I was like really into motocross, which had one group of friends, and I was really into this backpacking thing, which had another group of friends. And the thing I noticed is that my motocross friends didn't come and visit me in the hospital. Almost none of them. And my newer and less connected backpacking friends all showed up. It kind of chokes me up to think about it. And I think that set me on that path, right? A couple other things happened. I read Colin Flesher's The Complete Walker, which is this classic tome of distance hiking, which made me want to hike the PCT, do those sorts of things. So that was a draw. And the other thing is that there was some chance they were going to cut my foot off because I got this terrible infection in this wound that I got from crashing. I ripped the top of my foot off and I landed in this like stagnant pond of water. And so there was not really like, hey kid, we might cut your foot off, but it was in the air that the foot could go. And so I was thinking about like, well, how could I hike this trail without a foot? Because I didn't know Greg DiMartino at that time. But yeah, so all those things, like I think back on these pivotal events, those were the steps. And so I got really into backpacking and trying to go deeper, in Minnesota and the Boundary Waters into wilderness. And it just kept being like, you need to go to the mountains. You need to go west. You need to go these places where you can get, you're not crossing a road every 20 minutes in the middle of Wisconsin. You're out there. And so that was like all the basis for wanting to backpack in the West, the Bob Marshall Wilderness. I remember reading about that. But then when I got into climbing, like it just trumped it all. And once I first rock climbed and I was looking at Rocky Mountain National Park, which I was in Colorado State in Fort Collins, Colorado. which I went sight unseen. I'd never been there. I just signed up and they accepted me, and I was like, that's where I'm going. You can see Long's Peak from campus, and that's it. And once I started looking at those things, I was like, okay, backpacking will be a part of this, but I also want to learn how to not just walk up the backside. I want to walk up the diamond. The diamond looms over Colorado State. You can stand at the student union back then and out on the patio, and I'm sure it's the same. You can just look right at it on a sunny day. So that was next, and it kind of like all the other stuff fell away.
Hello, friends. Just a quick break. This is not an ad. If you have been enjoying these conversations, I would love for you to subscribe to my newsletter. It is where I go deeper, sharing stories, reflections, and behind the scenes insights that don't always make it into the podcast. I write about what I'm learning from elite athletes and how to stay ageless in body and mind. If you have ever wanted a thoughtful, inspiring read that ties it all together: training, aging, mindset, and awe. You will love this. You can find the link in the show notes or just head to agelessathlete.co. Again, www.agelessathlete.co, that is, to sign up. And yeah, just a couple of emails a month, and you can unsubscribe anytime. Absolutely no spam ever. Okay, back to the show.
Many of us discovered climbing maybe following that similar route, the exposure to the mountains and then being inspired by maybe more difficult ways to get up the mountain, which use all our faculties. But you had this transformative event.
Mm-hmm.
You were laid up in the hospital, and the people that reached out to you were people, let's say, who you bonded with
Mm-hmm.
over the backpacking trip. So it seems like there was also this early sense of community that backpack climbing creates, doing difficult things, which brings us together because, these kids had gone and done this trip with you with, you were like, let's say, supervised, sight unseen.
He was a genius with that, and he was very much a person. His name was Walter Sitz. I think he's still alive, actually, but he was a genius with creating that sense of independence. I went on more trips that were supervised by him, and longer ones. We would go to 10-day trips to the Mountain Waters, and his whole vibe was like, "You do it. You're on your own. I am here because I need to be here legally or whatever. I'm the facilitator, but you are doing this all. You're carrying the shit. You are making the fire. You are cooking dinner. You are, out here doing it on your own and by yourself a lot of times. He even on the trips to Boundary Waters, there would be days or nights when he would deliberately go camp somewhere else and be like, okay, tonight it's you guys, good day. And he'd paddle off in the canoe. So it was pretty cool, genius kind of way to foster this independence that I found. And also I want to backtrack. And there's motocross people out there like, we're just as good a community. And yes, true. The kids I was hanging out with were not. That's all I'm saying. That was also my pathway to a lot of other destructive behaviors, possibly. So we'll just say that the motocross crowd that I was into, the kids in the neighborhood who had motorcycles and the kind of independence to ride off into the woods with their motorcycles, were doing a lot of other things that probably weren't good for an 8th grader either.
There was that famous book, right? I'm trying to remember the name, where these boys running amok in an island, and this could have
Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, exactly, Lord of the Flies, and this could have turned into that, except for that is really, if people are given more responsibility, they rise to the occasion, and kids do as well. And that was such a monumental lesson in taking responsibility and learning skills from the ground up that you were, let's say, fortunate, you and your cohort were fortunate to have gone through. Chris, you have traveled far and wide for climbing, all over the world in some ways. You spent time in New Zealand, I believe. You have climbed in Jordan and of course, all over the US. So when you think of memorable experiences through your climbing, do you think the ascents matter more? Or do you think the places and the time that you spend there, do you think that matters more? Or do you think it's kind of just all like all mixed up?
Yeah, I mean the last ingredient there is the people, that you're spending time with is I mean, any climber who does expeditions or long trips will say that that's really the fundamental thing, good and bad. I mean, because I remember trips where I wasn't getting along with everybody on the trip. But I think, I mean, the places are super important. I think it's that order. It's people, places, then the climb, for sure. And the one thing I've talked about with climbing travel, because I at least the kind of climber I am, it's super fundamental to climbing, and has been for a long time, is to go out and to go to faraway places. And the cool thing about climbing travel, which is maybe something that you're getting at, is that we go, generally speaking, unless you're going to like a national park, but a lot of times we're in the middle of nowhere and we're in these places which aren't catering to a tourism level of experience. And the problem with the tourism level of experience is it puts this kind of wall between you and the people, because you're a business prospect. And speaking of Jordan, that definitely happened in Jordan. We were Westerners and we were there, and so it's like we're maybe worth a camel ride or a blah blah blah. But then you end up staying there long enough that you break through that. And climbing travel is a lot like that. Like I wouldn't buy a plane ticket for less than 3 months of a trip because it seemed like it wasn't worth it, No, and we get into our lives and why that was possible, but because it's not for most people, and I understand that. But yeah, so you're there past the camel rides, and Jordan's a good example. We were in Wadi Rum, which is a national park actually, and very touristy. But when you did your camel ride, you paid for one, and then you denied the kid every day for another week. He finally stops asking you, and maybe that can now be a way to have an actual conversation about something else, if you can speak the language. And so the climbing travel is really cool like that. Or you are in the middle of nowhere and you're just in a village and they don't see people like you very often. And that's another way to connect with people because they're curious. And so I find that it's just a whole different ballgame to go on a climbing traveling. Any climber who travels a lot just will endlessly talk about those experiences as much as they'll talk about the climbing experiences. So yeah, it's a big important part of it. And we compare sports, and there's like these categories like kayaking and surfing and climbing and things that kind of fit together in a different way than more mainstream sports. And I think that applies to all of those things. And just opening your eyes to what's out there in the world. If you allow yourself to do that. I know plenty of climbers, surfers, and everyone else who can just travel through these places with only the end goal of surfing the wave or climbing the climb on their minds and kind of walk through with blinders on. And it's a bad experience for both sides of the divide.
We may not always think about that aspect of the trip. When we think about planning a trip to, I don't know, Jordan or Australia, we think of like all the epic lines we want to get on. But then what we feel enriched by the most are those connections with people. And I like the fact that you drew both scenarios. One scenario was you dropped, like you said, in the middle of somewhere in Canada, right, for 30 days, like maybe no other, not much human habitation in sight. But then there's also this aspect where you dropped into a busy, bustling, let's say, tourist place, but you get to see and experience the place in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
But not only that, you also change the perception of what a foreigner might be to that person who's hawking trinkets. Or in my case, one time when I was in Yangshuo and I would keep going to the same noodle shop day after day, they realized, oh, I wasn't just another tourist, right? And then they started getting friendlier with me and like, I don't know, practicing English with me in a little way because I kind of broke that stereotype for them. I think that is
Yeah, in many ways, that is just as powerful because it changes our perception. It changes their perception of who a tourist is.
Mm-hmm.
We could trade, climbing travel stories for a
Mm-hmm.
long time. But moving on a little bit, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I call being ageless. And what does Chris? What does being ageless mean to you, both in climbing and in life?
Well, in life, it's a struggle, I think, more so than in climbing. And those two things play off each other. And I just say that because, again, like the modern society, we'd love to just dip out of it. But most of us can't. And then also it does come, I mean, I'd never leave my family or whatever. I think it'd be really weird to just dip and be off in the middle of the world. And I'm not the type of person to pull up roots and have my family live in an RV or something like that. And so the responsibility weighs on you, and it's hard to be childlike and have this sort of wonder, have this no age kind of thing. You feel it all the time. But the whole point of climbing is to have that outlet for me where you can, and where you are still playing. And, it's because my kid now, he doesn't really climb, but he's often there. And I just think about how I look back at my parents, and I didn't really see my parents play. My parents were typical Midwestern. They were in their early 20s when they had my brother and I, and my dad went to work, and he worked most of his life pretty adamantly. And so, and play involved like having a party with your friends in the backyard and standing around, drinking, and back then like smoking cigarettes and like, a barbecue. That was it. I didn't have a dad who had a passion beyond, raising a family, and he's wonderful. He's about to turn 80 and he's an amazing man, but I never saw him play really. And so sometimes I feel like, a kid could look at us and be like, why are these adults are so irresponsible? Like, what are they doing out here? But that's what we're doing. And even if it's once a week that we go and play, or, if we're lucky and it's more than that, it's just such this outlet that, I'm addicted to it. And I think most climbers, or, whatever your sport is or whatever your pursuit is, that's what it is you get your moment of going out and play, and it keeps you ageless in a sense. And it also keeps you striving to fight the vagaries of time, in a way that, like, I have peers that I grew up with or family, in the Midwest who are the same age as me. And I'm just like, yeah, you had no reason to fight to keep your body in a certain way or your attitude a certain way. I can tell. And, I won't go any deeper than that to become insulting, but yeah, they didn't have it. And so I feel like it wasn't planned. It just, I lucked out. And I have this thing that keeps me coming back, keeps me trying to eat healthy. It keeps me trying to stay fit. Not because I necessarily need to perform at a certain level, but I need to, you just have to have a baseline to do the sport. You just do. And it goes for any athletic endeavor. So that's kind of, I think, my ageless idea is that you leave the house, you go out, go climbing, and you are a kid. You just are. That's all. I mean, if it's not play, then what do you call it? If you're bouldering, particularly, or sport climbing, or going to the gym, it's just, to look at it in any other way seems silly because it is silly in a way.
That is such a great perspective, Chris. It's funny. I was talking to this uncle of mine recently, who's in his mid-70s now, and he doesn't understand climbing. He doesn't relate to that part at all. Somehow we start talking about play. We literally use the word play, and his eyes sparked up because he's somehow, like, in his learnings over the years, he's tapped into the idea that play is such an important part of being a human, and is so vital to our existence that maybe he's getting older and this is hitting him, that the moment we lose that zest for play is really when we get old. And what I'm learning from you is
yes, the physical performance and the maintenance and all of those things are certainly important, but maintaining that sense of play that somehow, luckily, we have stumbled into with this lens of climbing in this case is honestly what's going to keep us alive. So let me get this. So let me ask you this. So physical performance matters to you as well. How are you able to maintain your zest for climbing, having done, only 4 decades? I'm
Right.
being facetious, but you've been climbing for a very long time, and you've climbed in all kinds of places. You've pushed yourself physically. How are you able to keep your stoke up, where it still feels like play? It still feels like something that you are, jonesing for.
Right. Well, I mean, from the physical standpoint, I'm not going to put aside like just genetics. I feel like I mean, I have friends who have lived a very similar lifestyle to mine, whose body's breaking down in a way that mine is not. And I think there's just a lot of that. And so I've lucked out. I've pulled a lucky card on this, and maybe it pushed me towards climbing, or I, realized that climbing could be my thing, and for whatever attributes I have. So that's been really, really nice. But the other thing is that, I've also shifted my focus to allow for my lifestyle and other things. And what I mean by that is that I spent my, a long part of my climbing career and, kind of my best sort of years, if you will, being a big wall climber, a trad climber, to explain, to non-climbing listeners, more big routes out in the wilderness, more commitment to sort of the adventure and in some ways the risk. Those kind of things were what, when you said jonesing for, that's what I jonesed for, was to go out and explore and to be in these faraway places where the risk is higher and maybe the reward is higher in a sense. I've shifted away from that, and I'm now in this world where sport climbing, so just going to a local crag for the afternoon or for the day and coming home, is my outlet. And instead of like lamenting that, it just kind of happened. And so now I'm in this place where I have a family, and I can go out and get my fix, if we want to, keep the drug analogy that I've found highly appropriate actually over the years, and still be happy. And then, but that type of climbing is performance level. And so I spent much of my climbing career not really worrying about performance in the sense of like training and preparing. I've made a joke that traditional climbing or big route climbing replaces hard for scary. And so you aren't actually a lot of times at your physical limit, you're at your mental limit. And mental limit in a lot of ways for me, was always easier to deal with. My body just performed, and it performed well because I was doing it every day. Now I'm in a position where if I want to perform, I do have to think about training a little bit. But the cool thing is that training, and from a climbing standpoint, fits into my life almost better than it did, because training when I was in my 20s would have meant I took a day off from actually going climbing, which I wouldn't, there's no way you could have talked me into that. Like, oh, today you should not go climb that tower over there. You should sit in a room and hang off of a wooden board. I would have been like, no, I'm going to climb the tower. Like, screw you. That's going to be my training today. Now my lifestyle is that 2 hours a day or whatever it happens to be is actually almost like a substitute for climbing. If I can get away with it. I say almost, I guess it's probably not even almost for me, but it is some version of climbing. But, so it's like, it's kind of this weird thing where the sort of trends in my life aligned to find myself at this very comfortable place of enjoying sport climbing, enjoying those times that I get to go do it. And if I'm going to enjoy them as much as I can or maximize them, then it's going to need a little bit of training, but I have time for training. So yeah, my attitude's just shifted to where I'm pretty comfortable with my climbing opportunities locally and my performance level. And the other joke that I've been saying, but like all jokes, it's partially true, is that I was never a very high performance rock climber in the sense of pushing grades. And so a lot of my friends who are getting older, they don't climb nearly as hard as they used to because they were such good climbers. And now physically they can't do it. But luckily I wasn't. so it's like I haven't experienced like this huge drop off in what I can go and climb. I have, as far as dealing with risk, I'm not a very good, risk taker anymore. I don't have the brain. And this is a really common thing I heard from a lot of climbers, is you just get old and you get scared. It's just part of the deal. So again, that getting old, I just naturally moved away from that stuff. And so I can go and have a great day sport climbing with very little risk and enjoy myself in a way that I never used to. So I don't know if that answers the question. I just feel lucky that my life trended, and maybe I just was smart and found these ways to get around any sort of disappointment. Now I'm 53, so talk to me when I'm 60 and maybe stuff has started to fall apart. I mean, I do have these injuries that I sort of nag me now and again, but yeah, so I'm just happy doing what I'm doing. Just kind of by luck, I guess.
I shall do that. I'll send you a calendar invite for a sequel to this 7 years from now. Hopefully,
yeah, we'll sign up now.
In your life, and we go back and
we'll check
back up.
Check this out. So when I turned 40, I went to Indian Creek, crack climbing area, a place I've climbed for decades, and climbed 40 pitches with a buddy of mine. 10 years later, when I turned 50, 3 years ago, I went to Indian Creek and climbed 50 pitches, 50 climbs in a day, just with a whole cast of people that were helping, putting ropes up and,
awesome.
and encouraging me and whatnot. And I right now, speaking of 7 years out, I tentatively have 60 at 60 in mind, because I finished 50 at 50 with some gas in the tank, and some routes left to do. And so I don't know, like I said, what'll happen when I'm 60, but right now I'm like, I'm going to do 60 pitches on my 60th birthday, or 60 in my 60th year, if I can pull it off. So maybe you can interview me right afterwards when all my joints are so inflamed that I can't move anymore.
Who knows? You might have a Jim Donini in you yet.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He's an inspiration. He still climbs a lot out there too, actually.
You pointed something interesting, which is, that because you were focused on, let's say, the more, lack of a better term, let's say the more adventure end of climbing than the pure athletic kind of.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Which means that you have that much more, headroom to find your limits. I find that actually, like I started surfing when I moved to San Francisco, like about a decade plus years ago, and surfing is one of those sports where people say you can't really get better, or you can't really learn this. It needs some of those like early muscle memory development. You can't really get good at it if you start as an adult. My counter to that is that I suck so much in surf that there's so much room to grow.
Right.
People hit their 40s in climbing or surfing, whatever. But if you start late, and sometimes I listen to Ryan Devlin say that, I think he said that he started maybe a little bit later, right? Which also means that he's not close to his limits yet. So there's many ways to explore that. One funny question to ask you is, I could be wrong in this, at times you have been, let's say, slightly disdainful of the sport of bouldering, right? And I'm wondering if you have also amended your views on that now that you are, pushing it out with the board bros in indoor gyms or garages or whatnot. Do you see there's like maybe some goals that you might have on this other end of the sport? You have like adventure climbing, you have sport climbing in the middle, and then you have maybe bouldering at one end. Like, is it now starting to finally excite you in your 50s?
No. Look, yeah, I mean, the reason it's like 100% that I suck at it. Okay. So, you're not very good at something, makes you feel bad, and then you find ways to like diminish it. Okay. It's as simple as that. It's a very common psychological crutch. But that's it. And the problem with bouldering at this point, and is that I mean, I can't even handle falling on a big fat pad from very high up without it not feeling good at all, or me having repercussions the next day. And I embrace it in the gym. We used to have a bouldering gym here in town, which very unfortunately for my training disappeared. They couldn't make it work financially. It's been a total blow. I had really come to count on it over like the 5 years that it was there. It's just a few blocks from my house, or was. So, I mean, I do it, and also partially it's like a running gag on the show, right? That when I talk to boulders, I kind of don't always have a lot to talk to them about. Also, it has to do with age. I mean, a lot. It's more like I end up talking to these young guys, and we just it's a big gap. But the other thing is that bouldering at a high end is probably the most sort of training focused part of our sport. When you look at like the Nugget podcast that does a lot of training stuff, it's primarily talking to these boulderers. And I do sort of, and this is going to like, there's folks that listen to this that are cyclists and all these very training oriented sports. I have a problem with it. I mean, I understand the need to have training, everything else, but for me, like the sport, whether you want to call it a sport, the pursuit, the culture, it's just like there's this magic in climbing. We talked about seeing those magazines for the first time, and you didn't think about, oh, I need to get, I want to hold on to that crimp that he's holding on. You thought about like just the audacity of what that person was doing, where they're, this backer article was certainly like majestic pictures of Yosemite and everything else. And I just push back on this need to scientize a word? No, to break this thing down to these molecular sciences of movement and of training and things like that. I get it. I do it. I'm part of it. I love Chris Hampton. He does it for a living, all these other coaches. But part of me just bristles at it a little bit because climbing is not weightlifting. Climbing is not even running. There's this ingredient to it. Runners and be like, no, there's an ingredient. Yes, it's called endorphins, and you love them and you're addicted to them. The climbing thing, I don't know. There's just this ingredient to it. Like I said, it's mythological, and just the breakdown of it all to just these like minuscule things kind of bothers me a little bit. So that's a long-winded answer. But at the same time, it just goes back to I'm terrible at bouldering, and it hurts me. And it's not going to stop hurting me because my knees and things like that are just getting more fragile. I find it's kind of scary, to be honest with you. Like, so hats off to these boulders that climb 10, 15 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
It's like they're free soloing almost. They're not going to die, but even a relatively like, pedestrian problem that gets you 10 feet off the ground, that's terrifying for me, especially if you're upside down a little bit, even if you've got a pad and 2 spotters or whatever. So yeah, it's all a weakness on my part.
Chris, when it comes to managing risk and fear, I think that boulders and these route climbers are like at these two ends, and they can't see eye to eye. I am more on your side, where I can log like, hundreds of falls on a rope, and I think it's the safest thing out there. And then somebody else, some other person, maybe usually a younger person at the gym, who climbs in double digits, they can't seem to manage that fear on a rope. And I don't want to take falls from 10, 15 feet, on a thick pad, because like you, I also have like some ankle injuries, whatnot, that I'm dealing with. I also think that's funny that they do all these courses now for like falling on balls or falling on ropes. I actually am talking to Hazel in a few days, and I don't want to talk about that as much, but I think a lot of her coaching involves in helping people deal with that fear of falling while on routes. I actually think there should be a course on helping aging climbers learn to fall on mats because I
Yeah,
never
totally.
took gymnastics. I don't know how to learn to land on a pad safely. I feel every time I fall, I'm like buckling and like tumbling. Like if somebody would
Mhm.
teach me, like really break it down, maybe I would be a little bit more successful at pushing myself, like on cruxes. Somehow they always put cruxes like at 15 feet at this tall bouldering gym at Dog Pass that I
Yeah,
put up. Why? I'm not
totally.
going to do this. That.
Yep.
Why should I be doing that?
So is the Verm John Sherman on your list?
He's not, but he needs to be.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, he needs to be, but he's also a cautionary tale because when I was just sitting here while you're talking, thinking about old boulderers, like people who really like push limits past 40 even. I bet you'd be hard to find. There's just some limits to it all. It's definitely a sort of more of a young person sport as far as all the pursuits. And we can point to, Lee Sheftel, who lives right here in town, who's a sport climber that climbed very, very hard into his late 60s and 70s. Poor old Chuck Odette is another name that I say poor old because it's the only time anyone ever talks about him is how old he is. But he's a really good, really, really good climber in his 60s. But the bouldering, man, I think it's probably there's a little bit of a limit to it as far as your subject matter here on the Ageless Athlete.
There are some people, people like Fred Nicole and Berger and Ben Moon. There are some people who come to mind, and the more I do the show and the longer I've been coming, I realize that they are, they are inspiring in deep ways, but I think they're also black sheep.
Mm-hmm.
It's genetics plus some combination of like mental mastery plus some ability to really manage their risk calculations that allows them to keep doing that. I think you're totally right. Like for the vast majority of us, I think even people who still boulder, I think over the age of, our age, not everyday athletes, not like the icons. I think they are really calculated. I think they've learned ways to like only do certain kinds of moves in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
They know they can be comfortable. Anyway, we digress. One thing I did want to ask you is, again, talking to younger athletes, and you've spoken with like athletes up and down the age spectrum. I mostly talk to like older people on the show and trying to get these tease out inspiration and secrets. I'm curious, when you speak with younger kids out there, do you think they also have some lessons out there on staying ageless that they may not, a Yanya in her 20s or a Connor Herson, they are not quite there yet. But do you think those kids are doing something today correctly that's helping them prepare for longevity in the sport? And do you think there's some takeaways from those as well that we can learn?
Yeah, I think, and this is a bias. I'm going to totally admit it. It goes back to what I was just saying about finding something in climbing, and I call it the magic, whatever, that is a connection that's deeper than performance. And I can think of I think you mentioned Connor Herson in that a recent, and Connor's this very bright light in traditional climbing right now. Although he's just an amazing indoor and sport climber as well. It just kind of gets overshadowed by his trad climbing because not as many young people are coming up in that. It's kind of becoming this sort of lost art. But you talk to him and he has this very deep connection to climbing that comes from his family. He's very steeped in the lore. He's been mentored by these great old, Yosemite climbers. And so to me, the longevity in the sport, that has to be there because we can talk on this show about how to stay at a high performing level, but that the whole sort of underlying part of that conversation is that we're not, and that it's getting harder and harder to do that. And so here we are talking about tricks to manage the decrepitude, if you will. So if your entire connection to the sport is performance and how hard you're doing it, then it's just not going to last. And so I think, when I talk to these kids for whom, competition climbing is their thing, and it's been oftentimes driven by external factors of their parents their coaches. I kind of think about, okay, well, you're going to have to find this shift when the competitions are over, or, you're not Jakob Schubert, who's in his 30s and still, just bagged his bronze, which it's funny to be like, yeah, he's the old guy there. But, the truth is in that level of the sport, it is. You got to go beyond that. And so I think that's still the lesson for us now. It's the lesson that these younger kids I see have. Their connection has to be deeper than performance. And not to say that pursuing performance the way Connor is, because he is. He's looking for the hardest thing to do and what's next every single time. But there has to be this spark or this other thing that's in there, or I don't think he can last. And I think Chris Sharma is a great example. It seems as though he's still performing at a level he always did, but he's not. And, my joke about my performance level maintaining because I sucked, he was, on the other hand, he was so good that we don't even or he's still so good, we don't realize that there has been this drop in performance for him through the deep water soloing and all these different things. He's maintained this love. And if you get him to talk to you and it's hard to get him, but he would be a great person for this podcast because his love and his spark for the magic, it's as intense as it's always been. That it's just this thing, this like ethereal thing that in climbing that drives him, even as his performance has and will inevitably fall off.
Yeah, it's funny, I try not to hero worship people in our sport, but it's hard not to do that with Chris because it's both. It's his performance, but I think also his purity of just the love of the sport. I mean, it's like, how can you not love?
I mean, talk about a kid who plays, right? Talk about a 40-something-year-old, 41, whatever he is now, guy who plays when he's climbing. I mean, if deep water soloing isn't that play, then I don't know what is in climbing. It's risky and what he does is amazing, but most of the time you're just goofing and falling into the water and you're in a bathing suit and you're at the beach. Like what's like not playful about that? It's incredible the way he's kept it alive, and his personality. I mean, he's just this semi-Buddhist sort of stoner dude that just keeps it going.
Somehow keeps it going and somehow still manages to keep up and often outdo, the let's say the more mainstream athletes of our age. Chris, a few final questions before we end.
Let's do it.
What may have been a significant habit or behavior that has most influenced you in the last few years?
This is going to sound like a platitude, but it's like a good attitude about the changes. Like I said, I've kept this sort of check in my mind about what my life is like. God, this is hard to say, but like looking at these positives that have both caused, maybe the less climbing and less performance, but are a net gain. And, you can talk about your kids, right? My kid, it's like, yeah, you want to talk about having an injury, have a kid. He's like this huge injury, to whatever pursuit you have. But the positives outweigh, and you can get down about certain things. So among my peer group, and I have some people who have really bad attitudes about climbing now because of their performance. Like I think I do a pretty good job with just focusing on those positives, fighting to get out, and then just trying to enjoy my moments when I go climbing with my friends, even if it's 5 hours, 6 hours away from these other things. Be there all the time in the moment as best you can. And that, it's hard to do. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, to not think about all the other things while you're out there. But I think I'm pretty good at that. And I guess it's a habit in the sense that it's something that I've taught myself to do in a lot of ways.
Chris, what has been, let's say, the best use of $100 in recent memory? It doesn't have to be the exact amount.
Huh. Best use of $100. Man. Oh, money. We have to talk about money. I just bought 2 new adjustable daisy chains from Metolius because I was rope soloing the other day, and I was like, which is a whole nother thing. Not rope lead soloing, but top rope soloing. That's this like magical little performance thing that you can do if you live in a place where you can get away with it. But yeah, and I realized how crappy mine was, and maybe slightly dangerous. And I don't buy a lot of new climbing gear actually, at least not retail. And so I came home and bought some new ones, and I'm very excited. So excited about 2 adjustable daisy chains. And if you listen to the show, that's even funnier than it might seem on tape.
Hang on, Chris. You have been flogging these climbing brands, these sponsors for like all, and you still have to go and spend your hard-earned money on gear.
Yeah, I mean, look, they advertise on my show. I am not a sponsored climber, and they are generous. But I also wanted this. I mean, I'll just say I wanted a pair of Metolius ones. I think they're my favorites, and I don't have a connection at Metolius. And to go and like, sure, if I emailed somebody there that I knew, and then I was like, hey man, can I get a couple daisy chains? They'd probably be like, oh yeah, totally, dude, I'll put them in the. But it's also pretty easy just to go online and buy a pair and save the time that you would have spent trying to get save $80 on a pair of daisy chains. So not worth it.
That makes sense.
It seems important when you're 20 and you live in your truck to get totally free stuff all the time. But I mean, look, Sportiva gives me enough shoes. Those are expensive. Love it. Yeah, Black Diamond gives me stuff. They're my other big advertiser. I got a cooler from Yeti. I mean, that's not something you just to scoff at. Those coolers, I don't know if they have like cocaine packed in them or whatever, but they're not cheap.
I agree. One would rather spend one's social energy trying to get a Mondo badass cooler than a couple of daisy chains. So yes, that makes total sense. Just maybe final question. You've been lucky, and you've crafted a life where you've been able to visit some of these amazing places and destinations worldwide. However, is there still a place you dream of going to climb? If so, just paint us a quick picture of what that place might be. What would you do there? What would that trip look like? Who would you go with?
The Tagia Gorge in Morocco it's not just a place that I dream, quote unquote, going. It's more that it's a place I could get away with going at this point in my life. And because I say that because I think you could drop into there pretty easily and get a lot done and have a great trip in a couple weeks from the U.S. And it's a place in Morocco. It's got big, long, bolted routes. I don't call them sport routes because I think they're bolted in a much more adventurous way than that. And I think newer climbers in particular can get confused by that. They're bolted. They're still scary. They still require you to go for it. But the reason that place appeals to me is that it's sort of expedition light. It's far away. It's an exotic new culture for me. Moroccan culture. It's Moroccan mountain culture, which is different than even if you were dropping into one of the cities. It involves some overland travel, but at the same time, it's close enough. You can hire operators to take care of the tricky parts, but you're going to feel out there, and so it feels like a really dad worthy thing to do. And I can probably get 2 weeks off here at some point and afford it and things like that. So it feels to me like a perfect middle ground between the good old days of disappearing for months at a time and now just being a local sport climber. And who I would go with, I got a few people that would be in mind. It'd just be who's available. But one interesting thing about getting older is that the pool of people that I really want to climb with has gotten smaller. And because I think, I'm happy to climb with some random person if it came down to it, but you kind of end up with this group of people who your time climbing is a bank account, and it dwindles, and so when you make a withdrawal, you want to make sure you're gonna spend your time with someone that you really want to be with out there having fun, and girls or guys or whoever. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting part of getting older with this sport, is that I'm not willing to just go put some ad out on the internet or whatever. Hey, who wants to go to Tagia? And I might have done that in the past. So yeah, there's a group of people that I try to pull from, but the thing along those lines is that also gets harder because they're in the same position as you are with time. And so lining your time up with someone else in your 50s can be tricky as well. As we all know, when you have a kid, all of a sudden you realize you haven't seen some really good friend in like a year, because it just doesn't work out because they have kids too. And they're in different sports or whatever. But yeah, Tagia seems like it would be a really special and fun place to go and get a little taste of the good old days.
Tagia is on my list as well. And what I hear about that place is that, yes, it is bolted climbing, approximating sport climbing, but the 511s there can be pretty scary. So I feel I'd be really solid at like higher grades to be able to comfortably go and like climb some of those routes. And the part about the experiential nature, totally resonate with, because I like to say that like where I live in San Francisco, like unlike your easy crack commutes, the drives to Yosemite and other places are still long. Like they can be long, and the reasons I
sound horrible.
Totally, I stepped away from climbing is I just wasn't getting as much joy out of the trip. So now I like to say that for me, the trip begins, when I leave home and I either get picked up or I pick up my friend, and I want that whole thing to be totally enjoyable. The stories shared, the car rides, the grocery shopping, the gas stops, the packing, the gear sorting, the snack breaks. All of that needs to be part of the experience, because I'm not willing to just go out with a random person just because I want to bag, or I want to belay on my route. Sometimes I miss that as well. I miss that joy of climbing I used to have, like even maybe 10 years ago, where like, oh yeah, man, I'm so jonesing to get this trip, and I really don't care who I go with. So, and anyway, there are like pros and cons of both. Actually, final question. I lied. This is the final question, Chris, about traveling to climb. You are a musician as well, so
that's right.
What kind of music is playing on your headphones when you are, or on your car when you are either climbing or driving to climbing?
It's been funny lately. I've been like going down this retrospect. I guess this is all these things too, getting old, I guess, like this retrospective of like what were these CDs and things that I like were influential in like my teens and 20s. Like I lived through in high school when we went from cassette tapes to CDs, and you would get one and that's all you listen to over and over and over and over and again. Like how many thousands of times have I listened to Led Zeppelin 4 or whatever? But yeah, so I've been doing this like retrospective of eras and to see if the music holds up. And so lately, I mean, I've been spinning like Iron Maiden and like Rush. I was a big Rush guy, but then also like I like dipped my toes into jazz in high school, because I wanted to be like a legit musician, not just this kind of like metalhead. And it's funny but a lot of the jazz I listen to is stuff that like really wasn't, I mean, a jazz person would laugh at, like for example, Spyro Gyra. Remember that band? They were like, I mean, it's like almost like some of their stuff is almost like easy listening, but I put it on, I can just vibe on like that time. So it's been a little bit of that. I actually just put out a couple texts to some friends whose music acumen I admire, and I'm like, I need some new music. I'm like stuck in this retro thing, so hopefully I'll get onto some new sort of place to listen to some newer music. But right now I'm in this retrospective thing that's been kind of psychologically fun to just like put myself back in this vibe.
Sure.
God, in my first year of college, man, I like Lou Reed's New York. That album was super influential on me. So that's been cool to check that one out again, and just see if it holds up, or if I was being silly, or like I said, get in that headspace of where I was at that point in my life. It's been kind of fun. And with Spotify, you can do it, or whatever music thing you do.
Beautiful. Chris, I can just tell that you are a historian to the core.
Even my own history, just rediscovering my own history.
Fantastic conversation, Chris. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers and easy conversation. I hope we get to climb at some point together. And if nothing else, and if not sooner, maybe, in 7 years when you are shopping for belayers for your 60 routes.
For this,
then
60 routes,
you can add my name somewhere over there.
Yeah, well, it's super nice over here on the western slope of Colorado. If you like sport climbing, mostly. The Black Canyon's not too far away, but yeah, always welcome. I'll come by, stay at our place, whatever you need. I love doing it. I live in a house with a actual guest room for the first time in my life, literally, which we got, I don't know, 5 years ago. So I was in my late 40s until I had a guest room in my house, and I owe a lot of time of staying at other people's houses. So I'm very open for people coming and staying at my house these days. And it's not just a piece of floor space or a couch. It's an actual awesome bed in a room all by yourself. So come on and use it.
Sounds amazing. It's been a great conversation, Chris. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Ageless Athlete with the incredible, inimitable storyteller that is Chris Kalous. It's been a couple of days since I recorded the podcast, and as I record this outro, I'm still smiling. It was just such a delightful conversation. I felt as I had been chatting with somebody I've known for a while. He is just such a easy person to speak with, knowledgeable, insightful, humble, and again, such a good storyteller. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. As we wrap up, here are a few takeaways I wanted to call out again. Chris reminds us of the importance of staying connected to the community, and that helps keep one's passions alive. Doesn't matter how old you are. Second, the power of play. Keeping a youthful, playful spirit, no matter your age. I mean, this is so essential. We need to remind ourselves on why we started our sport in the first place and try to keep that essence, no matter the grades, no matter our level of performance. Chris's life is a fun example of how you can evolve over time while staying true to the things that bring you joy. Whether you are just a climber or just someone looking for stories and inspiration to stay active and passionate as the years go by, I hope you found Chris's insights valuable. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with a friend, leave a review, just smash the 5 stars on your Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you listen to your pods. You can also check out Chris's Enormocast podcast for more amazing, great stories from the climbing world. I highly encourage Chris's podcast. Thanks again, friends, for joining us on Ageless Athlete. Until next time, keep pushing your limits, stay connected to what you love, embrace the ageless athlete within you. We will see you in the next episode.
Friends, this is not an ad. This is just a quick message to those amongst us who are listening to Ageless Athlete podcast for the first time. I would love it if you would hit subscribe and follow on your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Stitcher or Overcast or what have you. We bring you stories and routines and other inspiration from elites in the the world of the best outdoor sports. In each episode, you will find how these athletes stay connected to the outdoors, maintain peak performance, and continue to thrive as they age. I encourage you to look through Brad episodes and listen to a couple and see if they resonate. And then, come back next week. We release an episode each week. And I am really inspired to bring you some of the best stories from the world of the outdoors. Okay, back to the show.